Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And I am super excited and privileged to be able to speak with Mary Alice Hostetter. I hope I said that right. Thumbs up if I did.
Hostetter, Hostetter.
Hostetter, okay. Mary Alice Hostetter. And she actually wrote a couple years ago a memoir called Plain, which is a memoir of growing up as a Mennonite and kind of her journey in the Mennonite community and then her journey leaving the Mennonite community. Um, and I came across her memoir and was just fascinated by her story and wanted her to come on the podcast. So obviously, I don't want her to give all the details because, we do want you to look into the book if you're interested. The paperback edition just came out, I think, on the 7th. So it's like 10 days ago. So do look that up, and it's on Amazon. It's on many places where you buy books. But I'm super excited. Thank you so much, Mary Alice, for being on here.
Thank you for having me.
So, kind of to start out, for people who are not familiar with the Mennonite community, um, what is for you, because I know you grew up in Lancaster, because I think there are different, wouldn't you say, like there are different sects of Mennonite. Like it's not like everybody's just the same when it comes to Mennonite, right?
That's true. Yes.
So what sect did you grow up in, and what was it like being Mennonite for people who don't know, what a Mennonite believes?
Yeah. No, you're certainly very right that there are so many different kinds of Mennonites. And it's also true that the Mennonite church in which I grew up is no longer at all like the church in that area is now,
Hmm.
uh, with such rigid rules about dressing and what entertainment is permitted, and a lot of those things which in the book I suggest, as especially as a teenager, I found most oppressive, uh, because it set me apart from peers in a way that certainly when you're trying to fit in is not good. So I mean, some of the things that were um, a part of the church then, which remain an important part in most Mennonite churches, no matter what conference they're in now, are the pacifism, which is a large part of where Mennonites started their opposition to the military. Another very important part, and a part that separated them from the church back in Europe, was thinking that you shouldn't baptize babies. You should have people choose as more thoughtful young adults or adults that they want to become part of a church. So those two things have remained consistent. Um, Other things are being of service, which has, I think, remained an important part of, that you help out your neighbors, you help out your community, you choose professions where maybe the goal isn't to make millions of dollars as much as to serve humankind in a productive way.
Hmm.
So those are some of the things that I appreciate about the Mennonites and have remained. Um, Certainly, as I suggested in my growing up years, um, it felt like there were a lot of rules about how one behaves, how one dresses, what you can't do, dancing, going to movies, um, joining Girl Scouts because they wore uniforms and that was a military kind of thing. Um,
Okay.
yeah, things that certainly were not, you know, in any way dangerous. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that Girl Scouts are a dangerous group, but
Right.
when I wanted to join, and it was partly, quite honestly, not just the uniforms, but there were 12 kids in my family. And if all of us wanted to join different clubs or take different kinds of lessons, it simply wouldn't have been practical to go in that many different directions. But Girl Scouts cost money, and you did have to wear the uniforms. So
Yeah. What was your like church experience like?
there was a lot of church, um, and most of it was non-negotiable. I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't like, do you want to go to church on Sunday? Until you left home, you went to church on Sunday, and mostly you went to church Sunday evening. Sometimes you could get out of that if you had a lot of homework or something. You went to prayer meeting on Wednesday. You went to revivals for 2 weeks in the fall. You went to Bible school, summer Bible school, winter Bible school, um, Sunday school for sure. So church was a huge, huge part of life and an important part of life. And yeah, uh, one never thought to question it. Yeah, you just memorized a lot of Bible verses, and you got major prizes if you memorized all the books of the Bible in order, which I did. I can't remember them. There's still some tricky ones there, Habakkuk and some of those less well-known ones. But so anything about church was heavily reinforced and felt very, very important. That was a community that certainly sustained my parents through their whole lives.
Now, did the Menon I've heard at least this was an Amish community though, and I know there's a difference, but I remember visiting an Amish family and they told me that church was all in German, so they didn't understand the sermons at all. They would go,
Right.
and their Bibles were in German, so they went similar to you. I think it was like very important to go several times a week, but they didn't understand anything. They
Yeah.
just was that in the Mennonite community?
No,
Is it
and that was a big part. The Mennonites and Amish were originally um, part of the same group in Europe, and then um, one of the divisions happened when the Mennonites emigrating here wanted to speak English and have their services in English, and the Amish wanted to continue to have theirs in German.
I see, okay.
Yeah, so that's an important difference in the group. And I grew up I mean, the Amish were all around in Lancaster County. If you've ever had occasion to visit there, you certainly have seen them. So they were certainly our neighbors and a familiar part. And they were classmates in the public schools um, up until they had to drop out at the age of 14 at the latest. And that's also an important difference between Mennonites and Amish. Mennonites are able to pursue education.
Okay.
So,
So I was gonna ask you, because when I was speaking, I've interviewed a former Mennonite very early on when the podcast started. She's a friend of mine that I actually met in a coffee shop, and it was neat how we met, but she was a former Mennonite. And she told me that being a woman for her in her particular Mennonite community was not good at all. She did not feel that there was any appreciation for just being a woman, and being a woman was not considered very important. I mean, men were more important than women were in her particular community. Was that your experience as well, that you
oh,
didn't feel?
yeah. No, certainly that was, yeah, and that was true not only for Mennonites, certainly that was true for many mainline Protestant groups, that women could not be pastors or priests or in any position of leadership. And it may have been more so with the Mennonites. They've only pretty recently, and I can't remember what year the decision was made to allow women to be Mennonite pastors and go to seminary. But that's a fairly recent thing. And of course, there are scriptures that were quoted about, the hierarchy of God and Jesus and men and women, that were quoted as defending that practice. So I would agree with her take that back a few years ago, the Mennonite church was not terribly welcoming of women in any position of leadership or power. And so it did feel a little like women didn't count, except to do the meals for the, fellowship dinners and wait on the men.
Yeah. Was there any sexual abuse from the pastors for the
Not,
lady?
I can't imagine that it didn't happen, but certainly it was never. It has come out recently, not from Amish leadership, but it's come out recently that there have been some Amish communities where there was some abuse in the families, either sexual or physical abuse, and that the communities have a philosophy of they take care of things themselves.
Right.
So, yeah. So, and that movie that was, I don't know if there was a movie a few years ago, Women Talking, about a
Yeah.
Mennonite community, and that certainly did not feel like any Mennonite experience I was ever aware of or privy to, but um, I mean, I think part of the issue in that film was that it was such an isolated community. I mean, it wasn't, you know, uh, our Mennonite community was totally integrated with the rest of the world. We weren't, I mean, our farm was a separate world, but, you know, we were with other people all the time.
Yeah. So you didn't have that, cut off from humanity kind of thing.
Right. Not like that film seemed to present where they were totally cut off and they couldn't read or write and they, that felt really quite oppressive.
Yeah. What and did you think growing up, like childhood wise, did you feel that your childhood was a pretty healthy upbringing and
Oh, absolutely. I think growing up in my family and in the church, all those lovely songs you sing in Sunday school about you're safe in the arms of Jesus, and all of that felt so, God takes care of the lilies of the valley and the birds, and all those things felt very real and very secure to me. And the questioning for me began in adolescence when the pressure was on, for if you don't get born again, you will be burning in hell, from the evangelist. And that felt, I guess I was kind of a practical minded, thoughtful child. It's like, well, wait, I didn't do anything terrible. I didn't suddenly become a sinner overnight. I'm still doing my chores, respecting my parents, doing my homework. But suddenly, if I don't get born again, I'm going to hell? What? How does that work? It just felt really odd that that feeling of security changed so abruptly with nothing feeling different other than the expectation. And I
hmm,
think that so suddenly I would be having nightmares in the night about waking up in the morning and everybody in my family being taken, and I'd have to run the whole farm by myself or something. It's like, whoa, that's crazy. It just, I couldn't kind of figure out how that all made sense to me. And I think that's when the questioning began.
Did they, when you're talking about at 13, it was like this pressure to be born again. Did they even explain what that meant? Or like, did you ever hear of that before you were 13? Or it was just like this sudden, like, now you're an adult and now you have this decision to make kind of thing?
Well, I grew up with going to revivals there were revivals in the church, and there were also what they called tent revivals, where they'd set up a tent in a field and bring in some evangelists who would, you know, preach and try to have people get born again. So, yeah, I had heard it in the rhetoric, and it was an expectation, and other people were doing it. So I kind of thought I should be feeling it in a way that I wasn't,
Hmm.
because I experienced it just as a kind of a church expectation
Yeah.
and a
But
family.
what did bored again even mean?
Well, I didn't know. It didn't, it didn't make that much sense to me. It meant joining the church,
Hmm.
or, I mean, that was part of it
But I
for,
would guess too, if you were going to so many revivals, it's a very emotive, charismatic experience. That's what I've heard.
yeah.
And so for you, I would think, and I mean, I've had this too, it's like I'm not feeling it. So does that mean I'm not born like I would think it would be so heavy on emotions that if you didn't feel the emotion, you would think something was wrong.
No, and that, I think that's true. I thought I wasn't feeling like a sinner needing salvation. I wasn't, they would give examples of people who had been murderers or drunk on the street or, terrible people. And I think, well, I, I'm just a regular kid, It's like, why are they comparing me to all these terrible, they would go into prisons and help people get born again and do all this, and I thought, well, yeah, I'm not really identifying with this experience. So
Yeah. Was
so
it something that you talked to your parents about at all, or like were questions not encouraged at?
well, it wasn't. I did, and there's a chapter in my memoir about that. um what's it called? Oh, that chapter's called Billy Graham's Necktie, because that was another thing that didn't make any sense. It was like the men in our church had to wear a certain kind of um, suit with a, like, yeah, sort of a clerical color, and no, they couldn't wear neckties. And then I went to see a big Billy Graham crusade in Philadelphia, and it's like, whoa, Billy Graham can wear a necktie? Who's going to tell Billy Graham he can't go to heaven?
Hmm.
Why can he? It's like the different rules about what constituted righteousness just felt so arbitrary to me. And I did ask my mother about Billy Graham going to heaven with a necktie, but she didn't. She wasn't able to answer that very satisfactorily to my taste. But yeah, so those kind of things. No,
Why couldn't the men wear neckties?
I don't know, some bishop. I mean, that was the other thing. I thought the rules came from God. I didn't realize that there was this in between step of the bishops making rules about women's clothes. I mean, most of the rules really were about women, um, in terms of dress.
Hmm.
I mean, my brothers, if they went out into the world, they didn't look any different from any other guys.
Hmm.
But as a girl, as a Mennonite girl, I could easily be identified as a Mennonite girl. I
What
could.
was what did you have to wear?
Well, the dresses were longer, usually homemade. I tried when I worked to buy my own, dresses. Um, you had to wear a lace covering on your head at all times. Um, and so that was the main thing that I just hated having to wear that at school to, I mean, not that there weren't other Mennonite students in the school, but for me, that was just like, oh,
Well, you
that's,
would stand out.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's just so embarrassing. But
Did people bully you at all for that?
they really didn't. I other people have asked, and I think of that sometimes. There are a lot of international and Muslim students that I see going to school here, and and I always feel for them because I think, oh, they must feel so othered wearing their hijabs,
Hmm.
uh, and and I'm thinking maybe they don't feel at all self-conscious about it. And I also wonder if they get bullied or teased. I mean, it's so rampant.
Yeah.
But
Did
it didn't happen
the
to me. But I was sort of a student leader, so I I don't think people would have been likely to have messed with me. I mean, that could be, it's just I think it will, you know, it was just it would have felt odd if people did that, and maybe
what
they behind the scenes, but I certainly wasn't aware of it.
was it hard for you um like I guess where I'm trying to understand is did they ever explain why women had so many rules but men didn't have so many rules, like the disparity between the two?
Well, I think that is not again exclusive to Mennonites. I think that's part of
It's true, yeah.
our culture even now. Certainly less so, but if someone's a victim of rape, usually somebody is going to suggest that she should have dressed differently or not been out in the dark, or that somehow women are needing to take responsibility for things rather than saying, no, he shouldn't have done it.
Right. Well, I was gonna ask you, is the reason the dresses were long was because you would be a temptation to men if your
Oh,
dress was shorter?
yeah. No, I think that
Okay.
all about modesty.
Right.
If you didn't pull your hair back and wear a long, sort of shapeless dress, men just would lose their heads. Yeah, I don't know. It didn't make any sense, but I mean, I really wanted to participate in school sports, but for hockey, you needed to wear kind of little tunic length things. I don't know if that was true in your era or not, but that was true then. And that simply was not acceptable. It's like, and my brothers played basketball on the team in shorts, and there was no concern about them exposing their legs being a temptation. But
Hmm.
for girls, it was a different thing, and that you know that felt. a little arbitrary and unfair too. But yeah, I don't think that's at all exclusive to the Mennonite Church. I think there is that built into a lot of organized religion and also just a lot of general culture that women are tempting, so they have to take care of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about you started questioning when you were a teenager, I'm guessing, and I think you did mention this, it's in part because you didn't understand all of these arbitrary things, like being born again, but you didn't know what that meant. And then some people could wear neckties and some people couldn't, which you couldn't. Your community couldn't. You couldn't wear pretty dresses like other people, and you didn't really understand why. How did you, like, how did you start handling those wrestlings? Because I can imagine for a teenage kid, that's probably pretty oppressive to the mind if you're starting to question your entire community and existence in the community.
well, I think I found enough ways to kind of uh, sort of get beyond it. And I was the 10th child in my family, and a lot of my older siblings had gotten away from the community.
Okay.
So, so I knew that was a possibility. That my only future was not being a Mennonite farmer's wife.
Hmm.
That there were other options for me. So, if it had felt like it was going to be forever, I think it would have felt different. And I had a great high school experience. I had wonderful teachers who took me under their wing. I had, you know, uh, I was newspaper editor and I really loved that. I was a yearbook editor. I did all the things I could do, even if I couldn't play field hockey. Uh, and so I had areas where I could kind of give back and show myself and excel. So that felt good.
Yeah.
And
Did you?
and I had older siblings who were no longer involved with Mennonites. They were no longer living in the community. They were doing just fine. And I think that helped a whole lot, that
Hmm.
I knew that there was life elsewhere. And that was probably where I wanted to go. So,
If people left the Mennonite community, like your siblings, was that okay? Like, was everyone pretty accepting of that, your parents, and like they could come visit and there wouldn't be any tension there, or?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I certainly remember my mother being a bit tormented when she would hear that older siblings had left the church and done something awful like joined the Presbyterians or something. I remember her shedding a few tears about that. But no, there was no, I mean, you've probably heard of what the Amish do, where that is a part of a lot of their communities, the practice of shunning, where if somebody leaves the church, then families are supposed to exclude them from all fellowship and contact.
Yeah.
The Mennonites don't have anything that's part of the church. I
Hmm.
suspect some families might be a little less accepting than mine was, um, but just as a family, not because the church told them that's what they needed to do.
Hmm. So, when did you, because I know your memoir explores this as well about your sexuality. When did you kind of discover, because when did you left the community when you were 18?
When I went to college, I based,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did that? how did you start that journey with your sexuality? How did that start for you? And I mean, getting out of the Mennonite community, did you find it very freeing? Were you scared in a way that you were leaving what was super familiar to you?
I when I left to go to college, the because my family didn't have money to put 12 people through college, um, and thought it was important that if we wanted to do it, we do it on our own, which at the time I certainly didn't like, but I think in the long run it was probably not a terrible idea to have to get my own scholarships or loans or whatever. Um, when I left at 18, I could only afford it if I went and lived with an older brother and sort of worked as a nanny to his children. Um, he lived near the college where I was going. And I, at that time, I was so intent on going to college for going to college, not for partying, not for dating, not for, it was like I was with some friends recently and they were all talking about what college was about for them. And I thought, whoa, that that's crazy,
I thought
because
you went to college for college.
no, I mean, I knew that because I had friends who were going to college for the college scene, but I simply would not allow myself that possibility. I mean, I did a little dating of guys, but it was, nothing very serious. Um, but yeah, I think I was just, and my father said, when he said I should wait to go to college, and this is in the book, that all college is about is meeting a guy and getting married, and nobody is going to want a woman who comes with a whole lot of debt, as if it was, sort of a financial arrangement. And so I was pretty intent on proving him wrong. Um, so I think the combination of sort of working my way through college, taking care of my brother's kids, and being just stubborn and wanting to prove him wrong, um, contributed to college was not hugely social for me. Um, and whether that's good or bad, I mean, it's like I didn't live in the dormitory. I drove to and from classes every day, and it was about almost an hour commute.
Hmm.
So, going to hang out on the off times was not really a possibility. So,
Yeah.
so and then when I went out on my own to teach, um, I still thought I would find the right guy, but I also knew I had to pay back my college loans. And if Mr. Right came along, it was okay. And I still had no concept. Although in retrospect, I know now that some of my friends were lesbians, some of the people I taught with were. Back then, I had no, I was clueless. I didn't think about that as a possibility. So I certainly didn't think of it as a possibility for me until I did fall in love with a woman, and thought, oh, well, this is just a one time thing. It's not really who I am, because I just hadn't considered that a possibility. So
So,
that's,
so you said just to kind of, because I'm in your story now. Just like when you were talking about Mr. Right, did you ever, while that was all going on, did you could start dating some guys? Did you ever seriously think this might be Mr. Right, or that just never happened?
um, well, the most serious dating I did was with a guy who I now know was also gay. So we got along great. Went camping together, biking together, vacationing together. Um, and, you know, I thought, well, this is fun. But, friends would say, so, how are things going? And it's like, well, we're having a great time. And we did. Um, and I realize now that both of us were sort of uh, the others plus one for, you know, staff Christmas parties or weddings, back in the day when it might have been not so acceptable to kind of bring a gay partner to social events because most people were still fairly closeted. So it worked out great that we could show up for each other in that way. And now I know that that probably wasn't terribly honest, but we were good friends. So, yeah.
So
So
when did you first fall in love with a woman and knew you had fallen in love with a woman?
in my mid 20s. Yeah.
So tell me that story.
Well, that's probably, to protect the innocent. I think I wouldn't choose to share that one. I mean, it was unexpected and a very slow process, but yeah, I did come to terms with that being the truth of it. And as I said, I thought at first that it was just that time and that person, but it wasn't like who I was because by that time, I think I sort of had preconceived notions of I had sort of heard of a few lesbians and probably subscribed to all the worst stereotypes and didn't think that's who I was. You know, kind of the worst kind of stereotypes anybody could think of. And I didn't know any. So I didn't really have a community to sort of identify with until I came to Charlottesville.
Are you able to share your feelings on it? Like, how did you know that this was like, I'm feeling differently than I would if this girl was my friend? Or how did that realization come for you that then you were like, actually, I am attracted to women in this way, and this is what I want to live my life identifying as and pursuing lesbian relationships as opposed to men and women?
Hmm. Gosh, I'm not sure if I could pinpoint sort of a moment of realization on that. I mean, it happened was such a well, the whole process was obviously pretty slow. If I was already mid 20s before I came to terms with it, but um, and I'm not. I think for a lot of people, one's sexuality is sort of on a continuum, and now that I'm part of a community and have opportunity to talk to a lot of people um, who are also in same-sex partnerships, I realized that my my place on the continuum is very different from a lot of other people who started out at the age of 8 or 10 or 12, knowing that they were attracted to girls when other people were, attracted to boys. That certainly was not my experience. And I'm not sure, I think probably I'm far more in the middle of the continuum rather than um, off the scale on the end of women. And then you know, my wife was married, um, and has two children. And
Was married to a man
yeah,
or
a man. Yeah.
okay.
Um, and when we fell in love, she was a little self conscious telling her children. And her daughter, who was then 15, I think, said, Mom, you love who you love, which I thought was a very wise observation that, it's like, don't get hung up on rules or whatever. You love who you love. It's okay. So I thought that was I've thought of that sometimes. I mean, just because I appreciated how accepting she was, when my wife was so like, oh my God, the kids are going to be so upset. And she's like, it's not a big deal, you know? So,
How did you guys meet? How did that happen?
um, she was somebody I knew. She didn't work in the same agency I worked with, but our agencies interfaced sometimes. So I met her through work and knew her for many many years, um, and then we became friends and then became more involved. So yeah, so it was a work connection.
I guess because, and I mean, we've talked about this even before we started this podcast, that was something you even asked me about was like, do you really want to talk? Because it doesn't seem like we have, you're married to a man, and I'm married to a woman, and, the religious content on your podcast is even something you'd be interested in. And, I've just always wondered and have wanted to ask, but have never, even the lesbian individuals that I've come across, I think are very young in it, like kids almost. And so asking something like, what is it like loving a woman? They don't really know how to answer because it's maybe their first time or they've just, discovered that and they don't really have answers for something like that. And so I wanted to ask you because you being older and you said you've had this feeling since you were in your 20s. And now you are married to someone who is a woman and you're living life with this person and you're living married as I would live with my husband. You know, what, because like, what is it like to love a woman romantically? Because I mean, for me, to be honest, like the concept is very foreign. I mean, I have very close friends, and I've definitely had times where I'm like, this friend, like I'd live with this friend forever because I love them so dearly. But it's never been a romantic feeling that I've had. And so I've always wondered for you, like, what does that feel like to love a woman deeper than you would as just like a really, really close friend?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's any. It's like, if you don't feel it, I'm not sure if it's anything that is really something you can easily explain. I mean, any more than I don't know if you could put into easy words how you can love your husband romantic. It's just like, if it is, it is. And I'm not sure that there's a way to explain it. Like, if somebody doesn't want to get in the water to swim, can you explain how the water would feel to them? Probably not. That if you get into the water, it will feel this and this and this. That's probably a really bad, stupid analogy, but but just it's. I mean, it's like a feeling of security. It's a feeling of familiarity. It's a lot of things. It's probably true for same-sex couples or a man and a woman. I mean, I don't think that part is very different. That
But I
feeling,
guess I would say, if a man and a woman, there's two different sexes, two different ways of looking at the world. At least, you know, I would say from my experience, men and women are very different. And so when they come together, and I mean, this from dating guys, like there's a different way. And there's sometimes even a compromise that has to happen so that those people can like relate. A man and a woman can relate because they're both different.
right?
But I find that like when I'm with my girlfriends, like we don't need that explanation. Like we just got it. There doesn't need to be some sort of, there's no compromise. There's no um trying to understand each other. Like a lot of times it's just like I got you, you know. Um and so I wondered for you, like, is it different from a man in that way? Is like that person is your exact same sex? They totally they have the same things you do. And so when you're talking about that closeness and that reliability, in a way, it's because they're the same in the sense of experience wise, like being the same gender as you are.
No, that's an interesting idea. I mean, it would make it almost seem like from the what you just said that being in a relationship with a same-sex partner would be easier because you wouldn't have to work around all of the differences.
That's
Yeah,
kind of what I was wondering.
and I mean, certainly there are still differences, obviously.
Sure. Yeah,
If
personality.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, I mean, when I have lots of friends, are married to men, obviously, and when they're talking about some of the issues that come up in their relationships, it's like, oh, shoo, we have it so easy, you know, because though, some of the kind of typical male things don't obviously intrude in the same way that they do in some marriages. So, um, but I think I don't know that it's as yeah. Obviously, it's different, but I don't know if it's as different as kind of it needs to be. I think I'm not even sure that yes, men and women are very different in some ways, but I think we all have to negotiate around our similarities and make allowances for our differences and grow from it. And I think that's true with any relationship, no matter what genders are involved.
Yeah. I
And
don't
that are similar are just making that commitment that yes, this is a person you want to live and grow with, and hopefully together you're more than you would be if you weren't with that person. That's, I think, the hope for every relationship, that together we're more than we would otherwise be. And that's
yeah.
how I've experienced it.
Can I ask, like, for me, when I knew I loved my husband, it was like, and wanted to marry him and make that commitment. It was like I just really fell in love with his personality and who he was and his tenderness as a man and just his uniqueness and his strength being tender, which was just very unique to me and something that I loved. Um, and for you, like, do you know what it was about the woman you're married to now that was like, I want to marry this person and be committed to them?
Well, the difference, certainly in the marriage piece, was the marriage happened, 20 years after we'd been together because it had not been legal. So we were together for a very long time, and the marriage became when it was when the Supreme Court made the decision was, is there any point in doing that? What would make the relationship different being married? And we
Right.
kind of went round and round because we had already, done all the paperwork that you have to do if you're not married, just to do simple things like visit your partner in the hospital, or make medical decisions if they're incapacitated, because before um, gay marriage was made legal, all of those things were possibilities that somebody could say, no, you have no connection with this person, you can't make their medical decision. So we had taken care of all that, but we still decided to get married as sort of a further level of commitment, I guess.
Right.
And also, it did feel so good to be acknowledged sort of by the greater society, and doing a wedding. It was very small, but almost all of my family was there, and all of her family was there, and our friends, and it felt just really affirming to be surrounded by that love. So I think we're both very happy we did it that way, even though it didn't really make that much difference, since we'd already, done the legal things to protect ourselves from the ugliness that could have happened.
Yeah. What is your favorite thing to do with her?
Oh gosh, there are so many things. We both love to walk and hike. She's an artist, so I really appreciate how she sees things, how she sees things in nature, how she sees colors and shapes and shadows and all those things. So I really, really enjoy her artistic vision. We both love to travel, and have similar tastes in the things we appreciate seeing. So traveling together is very easy. Um, what else do we love to? Just simple. I mean, gardening, entertaining, cooking. Yeah, sort of the
Yeah.
regular day-to-day things we both just enjoy doing together. And we enjoy being separate, and coming back together and sharing whatever our separate lives have been too,
Yeah.
whether seeing friends independently, or her doing art and me writing, and then coming back together and sharing where those journeys have taken us. But,
Well, I wanted to ask you because I want to be respectful of your time, and we're already 1 minute overtime here, but just as a last question, coming from the Mennonite community, coming from a religious community, and obviously hearing scripture read, you mentioned you memorized a lot of verses, and then living a lifestyle that from the Mennonite community, but also from scripture, there's there's that disconnection there. Has that been hard for you to reconcile that, or for you has it been more like I just don't think they're interpreting what scripture says correctly, and that my wife and I are doing something that God is fine with? Or for is it it's more like I don't really care about the religion aspect of it. I just know this is the right thing and this is how I feel about this. How have you, because I'm just wondering, coming from such a community where that was your life. Moving from that to now
Yeah.
living something totally opposite. I mean, and forgive my ignorance. I mean, I've never met a Mennonite who became a lesbian. Um, what was that like for you? What is that like for you now?
Well, I don't know that I experience it as a huge disparity. Um, Now my religious community is Quakers, and I don't know how much you know about that tradition, but I think what drew me to them was their similarity in many of their beliefs to Mennonites, the pacifism and this commitment to service and all those pieces of the Mennonites I really appreciated. Um, the Mennonites now recently have become totally accepting of lesbians and gays. Not not some of the more conservative conferences, but the mainstream Mennonite church is way ahead of some other Protestants in their national organization voting to ordain, voting to sponsor weddings in their churches and things like that. So
Hmm.
I think I think if I grew up in the Mennonite church as it is now, I probably would have seen no reason to leave it.
Hmm.
But now I've been gone long enough and established a connection with a different faith community. But I have no questioning in my own sort of spiritual life, thinking I'm living a life that is wrong. I I I sort of feel that who who we're made is who we're meant to be, and I believe firmly in um, you know being of service, making every contact I have with every person along the way, you know, be a positive, making, whether it's a cashier at the grocery store or somebody I pass on the sidewalk when I'm walking or whatever, not to be positive about it rather than um, blow them off or be nasty because the egg was broken in the carton or whatever. So I'm not, and certainly I grew up with a tradition that would say that good works will not do it if you're not born again. I remember, that used to be that just being good is not enough. Um, but I can't quite accept that there's a heaven and hell, and I don't even know how the decisions would be made about who goes which place. I mean, I like the notion of a heaven where my parents reunited. That makes me really happy because they believe firmly in it, and I would be good if that happened for them. I don't I don't know that I can know that that would be true. So I try to make the best of what I know, which is what I have here.
Yeah, with like their tangible experience.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but
Well,
no,
Mary,
I have no torment about scriptures that I may have heard um, in often really hateful ways from the pulpit. Um, yeah, that would make me feel bad.
yeah. Well, Mary Alice, I want to thank you. I mean, first of all, for writing your memoir, your story, which I know takes courage. I mean, to tell you about your life to people you'll never know and may never meet. And um, I'm very grateful that you've written it. And I'm really grateful you are willing to do this podcast and, be real about your life and what you think. And I've learned a ton. And so I'm very grateful for our time. Thank you for being on the podcast.
No, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Good. I hoped you would. All right, Mary Alice. Well, you have a good day. Thank you so much.
And you too. Thank you.